Well, we're in the third week of our series, Game Plan. If you're joining us and this is your first time in church in a long time or the first time ever, if you're only here because somebody begged you or bribed you to come, welcome. We're glad you're here. You honor us with your presence. We began this series a couple weeks ago saying that God has a plan for everyone's life. And as I was leaving church that Sunday, someone stopped me and said, "Tom, do you really believe God has a plan for everyone?" And I said, "Nah, I was making all that up. I was just..." No, I said, of course not. Of course I believe that. I wouldn't talk for 20 minutes about it if I didn't believe it. And so we said in that first week, God has a great plan for your life. And we said that He wants to communicate that plan to you. He wants you to know it. And your life would be better if you got on board God's game plan. In the first week of the series, we also said that, though, you need to seek His plan. God usually doesn't write the plan He has for us in big, huge letters in the sky or speak in this loud, audible voice. Instead, He asks us to seek His will, His plan for our lives. And the reason He does that is so that we'll be open to the counsel and the wisdom He wants to give us. We also said in that first week that God is not a part of your life. He's not a category in your life. God is not a part of your life. He is your life. And so when it comes to understanding God's game plan for us, it's going to mean a deepening and growing relationship with Him. Then last week, we talked in a little more theoretical manner, but I found this message pretty helpful to me. We talked about how you could categorize God's will in one of three ways. That there's God's providential will, His moral will, and then His personal will. And just to recap, God's providential will is what God is going to do, writ large in history, with or without us. My kind of image I have is that sometimes God is just like a running back who's trying to get to the end zone. He puts his shoulder down, and he's just going to bowl over anyone who gets in his way. We see that in Exodus. God tells Moses, "Go to Pharaoh and say, 'Let my people go.' And Pharaoh says, of course, 'No.' And God says, 'Now watch me.' And God brings about a chain of events in which the Israelites leave or make an exodus out of Egypt. In Jesus' time, Jesus is standing there with 12 guys, and He says, 'Look, I'm going to build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it.' And here we are 2,000 years later, and a lot of human failings and a lot of human stumblings, but Christ continues to build His church. You can't stop it. You can't stop God's providential will, but you can join it. And it's God's will that everyone hear the message that Jesus Christ came and died for them. That message go to the ends of the earth, and everyone hear about it. And you can't stop it, but you can join it. Then we also talked about God's moral will. And the moral will is simply God tells us that there's right and there's wrong, and He tells us what to do that's right and what to avoid that is wrong. And so there's certain things you don't really need to pray about. Is this God's will for my life? There's certain things that God says, they're just out of bounds. You don't need to pray whether you should cheat on your taxes or cheat on your spouse or whether you should hold on to a grudge or whether you should seek vengeance and revenge. That and other things, a whole bunch of things that God says, don't do it. That's not my will for your life. It's not good for you. And so the more we know God's moral will for our lives, the greater grasp we can have for His personal will. Now, when it comes to the moral will, if you feel like, hey, I don't feel like I have a very firm grasp on that, I'd encourage you to read the Matthew's Gospel, chapters 5, 6, and 7. That's the Sermon on the Mount. And that's, to me, is the clearest place where God reveals His moral will. But today, and for the next 4 weeks, we're going to look at that third will of God, or third way you could categorize God's will, in looking at His personal will for our lives. And again, as we understand God's providential will and moral will, we begin to kind of hone in, or makes it easier to discern God's personal will for us. And today we're going to share an important fact or important truth that is another kind of filter in discerning God's will. And here's the fact, here's the truth about you. God has uniquely designed you. You are handcrafted, not manufactured by God. Psalm 139 says this, that God knit you together in your mother's womb, that you are fearfully and wonderfully made. God made you with a purpose. God made you intentionally. You have a unique design. And here's an important principle to grab onto. The more you understand your own unique design, the better you will understand God's plan, God's will for your life. Let me say that again. The better you understand your own unique design, how God has purposely handcrafted you, the better you will understand God's will for your life. Now, when it comes to your unique design, there are different factors that make it up. There's your heart or your passions. There's just certain things that make you excited about life, that put a quiver in your liver. There's just certain things that you get excited about. That's because God put them in there. You have a certain personality or mix of personality traits, and there's all these different personality tests, but there's a mix of your personality that makes you who you are. You have experiences that make you up who you are, make you unique. Today, what I want us to focus, though, on is another aspect that makes you unique, and that is your gifts and abilities. God has given you some gifts. He's given you some talents. Congratulations, you're gifted. Congratulations, you're gifted. God has given you some gifts, and He wants you to use them. And that only makes sense that that's His will for our lives and plan for our lives, that we would use the gifts He has given us. I mean, think about it. Say for instance, you didn't have a car, and you were walking all over the place, and you had no way to get around, and somebody very generously said, here's a car, I want you to have it. Gave you that gift. And the next day, they're driving by, and they see you walking somewhere again. And they'd say, why are you walking? How come you're not using the car? And maybe you'd say, well, I didn't want to put mileage on it, or maybe some other excuse. They'd be like, I gave you the car so you would drive it. God gives us gifts, so we'll put them into practice, so we'll use them. Now, there's a couple kinds of gifts that God has given us. First, there's just natural, raw ability or talent. God's given you some just talents. Maybe you have a musical talent, maybe athletic skill. Maybe God has given you, ability to speak or to write. God might have just given you ability to manage people. You have it very easy that you understand people and you can get them to collaborate and work together. Maybe God has given you some kind of editing ability, or maybe you just can analyze things. But God has given you some gifts or talents that are kind of natural to you. The other kind of gifts that God has given you, if you're a Christian, He's given you some spiritual gifts. And spiritual gifts, they're hard to define, but there's almost, for lack of a better word, something supernatural about them. That when you exercise your spiritual gifts, that God's Spirit moves through you. And even once in a while, you will experience the Spirit of God kind of moving through you as you exercise these gifts. My wife, Mia, was sharing that she has a spiritual gift when it comes to praying in her small group. For whatever reason, she doesn't know why, but when she gets in that environment and she prays, not all the time, but sometimes she can just feel God moving through her. And others have validated that they felt the Spirit of God move through her prayer. See people at the door who greet, and they have a spiritual gift of hospitality. They just have an ability for, there's just something that God uses them, and they smile, and they say welcome, and people just immediately feel relaxed coming through the door. See it in the Kids Zone. People have a gift for just making little kids zones for 3 and under. I love the Kids Zone because they take care of my kids. So, very selfish that way. Any case, they just make little kids feel comfortable. They make parents feel at ease. They have a spiritual gift. Some people, they have the spiritual gift of mercy. They see people in pain, and their heart goes out to them, and they have great empathetic skills. There's spiritual gifts that God has given you. And if God has given you gifts, He wants you to use them. Now, here's the irony I found with our gifts and our talents, is that often we're the last ones to know we have them. We don't understand our own giftedness. And I think some of that comes out of the reality, or comes out of this thing that because we have the gift, we just think everybody can do it. We assume because we can do it, everybody else can. I remember 16 years ago, I started out in youth ministry here. And the very first night when we had classes, like middle school classes, and at the time we had confirmation classes. And so, kind of last minute, I had to jump in to teach a confirmation class. And it was in this room that was separated by these accordion dividers. And so there was 2 rooms, and you couldn't see the other the other class, but you could definitely hear them. And so I was on one side, and Drew Carberry, who was a youth ministry veteran, was on the other. And at the end of the class, after about 45 minutes, the class wraps up, or an hour, and I talked to Drew, and Drew says, "How'd it go?" I said, "Okay, it went all right." And Drew said to me, "Well, you kept them engaged. You kept them interested." I said, "Yeah." And in retrospect, I realized that what Drew was saying to me was like, not everybody can keep 15 freshmen in high school interested about matters of faith. There's a gift you have. And so often we don't recognize our own gifts. This is why it's so important that if you see somebody exercising their gift, exercising their talent, especially a young person, you need to call that out and encourage them and say, "You have a gift, you have an ability." My son Gus is 9. I have 6 kids. Gus is the second oldest. He's 9. And he's just got a natural ability to get younger kids to play together and have fun together. He'll naturally just play with my 5-year-old and 3-year-old and get them having fun. He'll be at the playground, and he'll just get a group of younger kids playing some kind of game, and he just gets them organized. He's got a gift. And so I need to encourage him in that. And as I continue to encourage you to exercise your gifts, we're going to drill down a little deeper by looking at a passage from 1 Timothy. 1 Timothy 4. Now, 1 Timothy was a letter written from the Apostle Paul to Timothy. You got it. You're a smart group. Sorry, down here, front row. So it was written from Paul to Timothy. And Paul is kind of a spiritual mentor to Timothy. And so Paul writes to Timothy telling him how to pastor his church. And so here we are in 1 Timothy 4:14. He says this: "Do not neglect the gift you have, which was given you by prophetic utterance when the elders laid their hands upon you." Paul says to Timothy, do not neglect your gift. Now, the gift he's talking about is preaching and teaching. But do you know why Paul said to Timothy, do not neglect your gift? Because he'd be tempted to neglect his gift. All of us are tempted to neglect our gifts. I think sometimes we're tempted to neglect our gifts just out of laziness or, not a great work ethic or because we're tired and worn out. Sometimes we neglect our gifts because we're not satisfied with them. We want to be like somebody else, or we get jealous of somebody else's gifts, or we think we should be more like them, and we're insecure with the way God has gifted us, and then we need to be like somebody else. I think sometimes we neglect our gifts because there's just a natural pull in this fallen world, the sin-stained world, away from our giftedness. You see this all the time in business or organizations, right? Somebody is really good in maybe sales. They're a great salesperson, and so they get elevated to being a manager, and they're a terrible manager. And so now no longer are they using their sales gifts, and they're being a bad manager. They get promoted out of their giftedness. The world, this sin-stained world, will drag us away from our giftedness. So Paul says to Timothy, he says to you, do not neglect your gift. And he says this, practice these duties. Practice these duties. If you're like me, you hear Allen Iverson's voice. Practice. We're talking about practice? No one gets that. That's a sports reference. You guys need to be watching some more ESPN or something. Explain. Anyway, ask somebody later. In any case, practice these duties. So what do we mean by practice? Practice can mean two things. One, I think it just simply means we need to work on our giftedness. Work on our abilities. Practice them. Proverbs says, if you see a man skilled in his work, he will stand before kings. He will not stand before obscure men. That means put time and energy into your skills because it will take you great places. I'm in a small group with Joe Weaver, who's in our band. I think here's a picture of Joe we got. He's in the purple shirt there. And Joe plays our lead guitar. Joe plays mean guitar. And he's in my small group. And one time it came out in a conversation, he was saying he practices 3 hours a day. And he said that, and I stopped. I said, Joe, you practice 3 hours a day? He says, I practice 3 hours a day. If you look at Joe, look at him in the closing song, it looks so effortless. It looks like he's barely trying. But that's the thing. When you see somebody who makes something look easy, It's because they put hours and hours of practice into it. You need to practice your gifts and get better at them. Middle school students, high school students, college students, 20-somethings, practice your gift. If you know you have a gift, begin working on it now. It will pay you such dividends down the road. Then practice our gifts means simply to leverage them, to look for opportunities to use them. Not just in work, which is, a clear place, or in school, but to use our gifts when it comes to our relationships. Parents, are you leveraging your gifts to be a better father? Are you leveraging your gifts to be a better mother? And don't worry about the gifts you don't have when it comes to parenting. Use the gifts you have. Are you leveraging your gifts to be a better roommate? Leveraging your gifts to be a better friend? Practice. Leverage your gifts. Paul goes on, he says, practice these duties, devote yourself to them, so that all may see your progress. There's just something inspiring about watching somebody make progress in their giftedness and get better and better and better at it. Paul says that's inspiring to other people when they see your progress. Then he says this is the last verse we're going to look at. He says, verse 16, take heed to yourself. Take heed to yourself. In other words, pay attention. Timothy, pay attention. Take heed to yourself and to your... And then he fills in the blank with Timothy's gift. But listen to Paul say that to you. Take heed. Pay attention to yourself. Pay attention and to your gift of accounting. Pay attention to your gift of being able to bring people together and collaborate. Pay attention to your gift to be able to work with little kids. Pay attention to your teaching ability. Pay attention to your writing ability. Pay attention to your ability to analyze and troubleshoot things. Paul says, pay attention to your gift. Pay attention to your teaching. And then he gives the motivation. First he says, hold to that. Grab hold of your gift. And here's the motivation. For by so doing, you will save both yourself and your hearers. By so doing, by using your gift, you will save yourself and the people who benefit from your gift. What does he mean by that? Does that mean that somehow in using our giftedness, we save ourselves from sin and eternal separation from God? No. Only Jesus can do that. Only Jesus, by his work on the cross, can do that. Here's what he means. You see, God has not just saved you from something, he has saved you for something. And God is saving you, and there's a part of salvation that's becoming the best version of yourself, becoming the person who God has created you to be. And here's the reality. You will never become who God has created you to be apart from your giftedness. Using your giftedness is helping you become the best version of yourself, who God envisioned when he created you. So Paul says, use your giftedness to save yourself and to save others. Again, there's just something inspiring about people who develop their gifts and put them into practice. I mean, that's why we pay money to go to concerts or movies or sporting events, because in some ways we're inspired. These people have developed their gifts. Paul says when you use your giftedness for God's glory, you can draw people into a relationship with Jesus Christ. Use your giftedness to save others. So, not sure how this lands with you or what you should do with it. I have a couple of suggestions. I have three kind of broad suggestions and also kind of questions for you. Number one, I would encourage you to write down your gifts this week. Take 5 minutes, 15 minutes. Just write down. Say, God, I believe these are the gifts you have given me. And write down 3 or 4 gifts you think God's given you. Now, if you can't do that, if you're like, I have no idea what my gifts are, then I want to encourage you to discover your giftedness. And you can do that one. Ask the people around you, what do I do well? What do you see me do well? There's a book out there called Strength Finders 2.0. You could get that book, and there's like a test you can take to help you discover your giftedness. I I'd also say make sure you get moving. That we're never going to discover our giftedness sitting on the couch or surfing the internet. We got to do something. So often we stumble over our giftedness rather than, discover it through some kind of mental exercise. So search, if you don't know your gifts, find out what they are. Second, are you leveraging your gifts or are you neglecting them? Some of you know exactly what your gifts are. To say, what are your gifts? You could write them down very easily, and you have to admit, you know what? I'm being dragged away from my giftedness. I encourage you to say, how do you get back on track? You can use the gifts that God has given you. Third, some of you know your gifts, you're using them. Let me ask you this. Are you using them to build God's kingdom? Are you leveraging them some way to build towards the providential will of God? Going back to that category, there's the providential will of God. God wants to bring his name to all the earth. He wants everyone to come into a relationship with his son. Are you using your gifts in some way to do that? I encourage you could sign up for a First Serve here. That might be one way that you get volunteering in ministry here. Maybe there's other ways God wants you to use your gifts, but leverage them to build God's kingdom. God has a great plan for your life. He has a great plan for your life. And the more you understand your own unique design, the better you will understand that plan. And that plan includes using your gifts. Congratulations, you are gifted. Let me encourage you to leverage your gifts, use them, and in so doing, you will save yourself and you will save others. Let me pray for us. Father, thank you that you've given us gifts. I thank you that we are handmade, we are handcrafted, not manufactured. God, I would just pray that you would help us to leverage our gifts, that we would be a community of people who are using our gifts to both give you glory and to bring other people into relationship with you. God, I pray, just give us clarity this week of our giftedness and how we can use it, to build your kingdom. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. Amen.